Hey, I'm some nobody, and this year for Pride Month I wanted to do something special, but I decided to do something that I do all the time. I'm gonna yap about a character I like and try to sound smart while I explain why I like them, but this time the character happens to be gay. You know, for a straight guy, I'm pretty picky about my LGBTQ representation. What I primarily mean by that is I don't care for representation that feels disingenuous, like with Overwatch. Hey, it's cool you made Soldier 76 gay, but what about the 76 cases of sexual harassment coming out of your office? That's pretty much my only criterion for what I would call good representation, is I want to believe that the creators actually cared about it. Now, the character I'm going to be talking about today actually comes from a place that some of you might not expect, the horror genre. If you're not a horror fan, you may not know this, but horror actually has a long and storied history with the queer community. It's a genre that has always been looked down upon, dismissed, or regarded with disdain by the more puritanical members of society. Today, mainstream audiences like specific types of horror, but back in the day, you were going to hell for making anything scarier than Steamboat Willie. Horror pushes boundaries and exposes people to things that make them uncomfortable, so naturally over the years it's one of the things that's been blamed for everything wrong with society. And that means the genre has always been a bit more open-minded than others, not always progressive, but definitely open-minded. Take a look at one of the most famous and influential horror stories of all time, Frankenstein. The original novel was written by a woman, Mary Shelley, in 1818. The play version of the novel was written by a woman, Peggy Webling, in 1927. And the film adaptation of the play version of the novel was directed by an openly gay man, James Whale, in 1937. A lot of people believe that James Whale actually intended for the monster to serve as an allegory for living as a queer person, and it's not too hard to see why. The monster's given life he didn't ask for, doesn't come out exactly the way his creator envisioned him, and is immediately hated by everyone, including his creator, for things he can't control. But ironically, Whale's film actually has significantly less gay undertones than the original novel. Another one of the most important horror films of all time, Nosferatu, was also directed by an openly gay man, F.W. Murnau, in 1922. Vampirism is a condition that people have been using allegorically for queerness pretty much since people started writing stories about vampires. Sometimes they don't even use it as an allegory. 25 years before Bram Stoker's Dracula, you had Le Fanu's 1872 novella Carmilla, which depicts a female vampire falling in love with and preying upon a young woman named Laura. It makes a lot of sense if you stop and think about it. From the human perspective, a vampire is a beautiful, seductive creature of the night that tempts innocent young men and women into an unnatural love. From the vampire's perspective, they are beings that will never truly fit into society because of their dark cravings, so no matter how well dressed they are, they can't help but despair over their cursed existence. You don't need to put your glasses on to see the potential for an allegory here. Moving away from vampires, in 1960 a movie called Psycho was released that changed everything about the film industry, not just horror movies. By modern day standards, it's absolutely tame. You could probably show this to your 4-year-old and they'd say, "What is this shit, Dad? SpongeBob is more violent than this." And they'd be right, but they'd be right because Psycho was such a huge success and pushed those boundaries back in the 1960s. And a key factor to that film's success is Anthony Perkins' performance as Norman Bates. You could probably write a whole essay about how Anthony Perkins being gay/bisexual and the way Hollywood treated him for it influenced his performance as Norman Bates. I'm not smart enough to do it, but somebody could. All I'll say is the thing that set Perkins apart from his contemporaries and made Norman Bates an iconic horror character was his vulnerability. And putting it simply, a straight actor in 1960 would not be willing to put forth that level of vulnerability. A straight actor in 1998 wasn't willing to put forth that level of vulnerability. A key factor to the 1998 shot-for-shot remake of Psycho sucking ass is that Vince Vaughn's Norman Bates is impossible to sympathize with. Jumping ahead to a time when movies actually had color, you had Clive Barker. Clive Barker is gay, and he's also an absolute renaissance man of horror with works in almost every medium of entertainment. Games, movies, books, comic books. If you enjoy horror at all, you've partaken in one of Clive Barker's works. He's the man behind Hellraiser and Candyman. though admittedly the late great Tony Todd's version of the character is way different than the version from Barker's original story. Point I'm making with this long prelude is that queer folks are responsible for some of the biggest, most genre-shaping pieces of horror fiction of all time. Horror as we know it wouldn't exist without the LGBTQ. And the queer horror creator that has had the biggest effect on me personally is 100% Don Mancini, the creator of the Child's Play franchise. Chucky scared the shit out of me as a kid. See, I've never been to a summer camp, I don't live on Elm Street, I'm never going to Texas, but I had toys. And the idea that my toys could come to life and want to hurt me was terrifying when I was younger. I used to hit my stuffed Goldberg with pile drivers off the bed to the floor Rhino style. He had a motive. Now I love the Child's Play franchise, and I respect the hell out of Don Mancini for sticking by it for the last 40 years. The only Chucky thing Mancini wasn't involved in is the shitty 2019 remake that only happened because Orion Pictures technically owns the rights to the first movie. And they wanted to make a quick buck by rebooting a franchise that was still actively going with the same timeline from the very first movie back in 1988. Chucky is Mancini's baby. He holds the character and the franchise close to his heart, and I'd say the love and care Mancini has put into the franchise is just as responsible for Chucky's status as an icon as Brad Dourif's voice. That personal touch, Mancini putting his heart and soul into even the most ridiculous Chucky movies, is what makes the series truly special. It's why so many of the actors involved have remained committed to the franchise for decades at this point. Not too long ago, Brad Dourif formally retired from acting, but he retired with the condition that he would still play Chucky. And Mancini putting his heart and soul into the story of a foul-mouthed killer doll is also what led to the character I'm talking about today being created. That's right, after 7 full minutes of intro, I'm finally saying that my favorite gay character ever is the main protagonist of the Chucky TV series, Jake Wheeler.
Talk to me, damn it. I'm gonna...
Now that we're finally here, I have to tell you all the truth. This video will have spoilers for Chucky Season 1. Heartbreaking, I know, but at least I'm only talking about Season 1. I do really like the second and third season, but I think the first one is the best for Jake as a character, because Season 1 is a lot more personal and smaller scale than the seasons that follow, primarily taking place in Chucky's hometown of Hackensack, New Jersey. The first season takes the classic approach to Chucky as an antagonist and has him attaching himself to a kid that he manipulates into doing his bidding. Key difference is that the kid in question, Jake, isn't a 6-year-old that can be tricked by the fact their toy is talking to them. Not to mention the fact that the power difference between Jake and Chucky is considerably more even than it was between Andy and Chucky. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll come back to Jake and Chucky later, but I want to start by talking about Jake's life before Chucky starts fucking it up. And if I'm being honest with you, there isn't much to fuck up. Jake's mother died in a car accident before the series even started, which means Jake and his father Lucas are both kinda lost. Jake suffers from anxiety and depression, but he also wants to follow in his mother's footsteps and be an artist. Jake's a loner with no friends, so he's also a prime target for bullying. Naturally, this all chafes against his father, who is a typical blue-collar alcoholic that clearly resents Jake for being so much like his mother. He thinks Jake making his sculptures is a waste of time because it never made his mom any money. The art thing is far from the biggest issue Lucas has with his son though, because if you remember the premise of this video, Jake is gay and Lucas really hates that. Don Mancini has said that he based Jake's character on himself, and this aspect of Jake's father not approving of his sexuality is actually lifted directly from Mancini's own upbringing. And it's also an aspect that plays a vital part in Chucky and Jake's dynamic later. A huge part of what makes Chucky a threat is how insidious being a doll lets him be. And the obvious part of that is you can't say the doll did it when you're being being looked at for a bunch of murders. But the less obvious part of that, and something the Chucky TV series uses extremely well, is Chucky's ability to infiltrate pretty much any space. If you were to walk into your house and a doll was just sitting in your living room, you'd be concerned with how the doll got there, and you'd assume that somebody may have broken into your house and left it there, but you wouldn't think the doll itself was the threat. Chucky doesn't let Jake know he's alive for a bit. What that means is after Jake brings him home at the start of episode 1, he spends a lot of time just gathering information. Chucky sees the way that Jake's father treats him. He watches Lucas get enraged at the idea of Jake being gay when it's brought up at dinner with his brother's family. He sees Lucas destroy Jake's sculpture and positions himself in such a way that it seems like Lucas just missed Chucky by dumb luck. Chucky eventually reveals himself to Jake by helping him get some revenge on one of his bullies in a way that also gets Jake in trouble. Jake gets suspended, he has an argument with his father, and when Jake says that Lucas is angry everyone knows his son is gay, Lucas hits Jake and threatens to kill him if he ever says he's gay again. Hey Don, you doing okay, man? Lucas is a fucking asshole, but you have to remember he's just as lost as Jake. I'm not justifying threatening your son's life, I'm just saying without Jake's mother Mary, there's this huge gap between Jake and Lucas. Would Lucas be cool about Jake being gay if Mary was still around? Maybe not, but he wouldn't be beating Jake and threatening to kill him, because he wouldn't be letting the whiskey do all the thinking for him. Backing it up a bit, this massive argument where Lucas threatens to kill his son and Jake says he wishes it was his dad in the car instead of his mom, was deliberately caused by Chucky. The way Chucky revealed he was alive to Jake did two things. It immediately endeared him to Jake because he's helping Jake get payback on a bully, but it also served to further isolate Jake, because it comes off like Jake made fun of his family and a bunch of people at his school. Jake getting in trouble this one time isn't what strains his relationship with his father, but it's Chucky throwing a match at a house made of hay. Ultimately, you could boil the conflict between Jake and his dad down to Jake isn't the way his dad wants him to be. And that conflict existing is Chucky's main angle for manipulating Jake. Chucky kills Lucas not because he's trying to protect Jake from his abusive homophobic dad, he does it because he wants Jake to think he is. Killing Lucas right after his lowest moment, when things are at their absolute worst, means that things will never ever have a chance to get better. And Lucas is forever going to be locked in as the abusive, alcoholic homophobe that, to be fair, he was, but preserving the narrative that that's all he would ever be is absolutely vital to Chucky manipulating Jake into doing what he wants. Because like I said earlier, Jake's a big boy. He's not gonna do something just because his toy tells him to do it. But he will listen to somebody that tells him,
you know, I have a queer kid.
You have a kid.
Gender fluid.
And you're cool with it.
I'm not a monster, Jake.
I would have voted for Obama for a third term if I could. Best president.
a big part of Chucky's early manipulation is trying to convince Jake that Chucky is better for him than his dad was. Hey man, I killed your dad and now you're living in your uncle's mansion. That's an upgrade. Dude, I don't care that you're gay. My kid's gender fluid and it doesn't bother me at all. Hey, buddy, remember how I could have killed you and everybody else in this house, but I didn't? I'm cool. Forget gay son or thought daughter. Would you rather have a homophobic, abusive dad or a gaslighting, murderous doll that's also abusive? Because like a week after Chucky says Jake should thank him for killing that shitheel that used to use him as a punching bag, he gives Jake a black eye.
How you doing?
Not good.
Look, sorry about the eye, kid. I promise I will never do that again.
Heard that before.
Now, to the supernaturally possessed killer doll's credit, Chucky's stand-up routine did get Jake invited to a Halloween party, which is more than his dad ever did for him. Chucky's goal, the reason he tries to convince Jake that he's the only one that cares about him and accepts him the way he is because Chucky wants Jake to be different than the way he is. Chucky wants Jake to kill his main bully Lexi because if he turns a kid into a killer, he can power himself up through some voodoo ritual. That's not important. The important part is the core conflict between Jake and Chucky early on is the same conflict that Jake had with his dad. The key difference is that evidently Chucky is a much more effective abuser than Lucas because early on, part of Jake wants to be what Chucky wants him to be. A huge part of what makes the original Child's Play such a great movie is the effect that Chucky has on Andy Barclay. He's an innocent 6-year-old whose life is being ruined and nobody believes him when he tells them what's going on. The only two people that know Chucky's alive before he reveals himself to Karen is Andy and you, the viewer. When Andy says his doll is alive and behind all the things Andy's being blamed for, we know for a fact that he's not lying or crazy. The movie letting us in on that little secret means we're right there with Andy. We sympathize with him, we want people to believe him. With Jake, the same way that Chucky's manipulation is more complicated, the effect Chucky has on Jake is also more complicated. It's hard not to sympathize with Jake before Chucky enters his life, but what he goes through after Chucky shows up is even worse. As shitty as Lucas was to Jake, he was really the only connection Jake had left. Now Jake still has no friends, his parents are both dead, and he's living in a mansion, but he may as well be a stranger in his uncle's house. He really has nothing left but anger and a doll telling him to kill people. To be fair, if it wasn't the doll, it'd be a government agency, but Jake may as well crash out, right? If you don't got much to throw away, you might as well throw your life away to get back at one person. You know, becoming a killer, it may very well be worth compromising who you are as a person, what you believe in, and what you want out of life. I kind of see the idea of Jake becoming a killer in Season 1 as a metaphor for the idea of Jake staying in the closet. The idea there being that if Jake never came out, maybe he would still have friends, he wouldn't get bullied, his dad wouldn't beat the shit out of him, his cousin wouldn't pick on him. He would live a quote-unquote easier life, but he'd be living a lie, he'd be compromising himself, like I said. And there's a very similar idea there with the becoming a killer thing. With how fucked up Jake's life is and how much bad stuff has happened to him, the easier option would be to just give in to his anger and start treating others the way he was treated. You find yourself in a deep enough hole, it can seem easier to start digging down than to start climbing up. And just like with the first Child's Play movie having us right there with Andy being the only ones that know what Andy's really going through, we kinda have the same deal with Jake. For the first half of Season 1, Jake's bully Lexi is an absolutely heinous individual with seemingly no redeeming qualities. She torments Jake for absolutely no reason other than the fact that he's an easy target. She avoids getting in trouble because she's rich and the mayor's daughter. The first few episodes of Season 1 go all in on trying to make you despise Lexi. And the climax of those efforts is Lexi's payback for Jake/Chucky telling the whole school that she likes Pokemon porn. If I had to criticize the Chucky TV series, I'd have to say you would not get laughed at if you got on stage and told everybody you liked Pokemon porn. If you stepped up to the podium and said you be gooning to Mega Lopunny, the crowd would be like... So to get revenge on Jake for humiliating her, which in turn was payback for her humiliating him, at the Halloween party I mentioned earlier, Lexi dresses up as Jake's dead father and does a little "I'm getting electrocuted" dance. That is fucking demonic. I ain't proud to admit it, but when this happened, I was siding with Chucky. Listen, Jake, I know the doll killed the housekeeper for fun in this same episode, but he might have a point here. You maybe should kill this girl. You put me in this same situation where I have nothing left, I'm being groomed by a killer doll, and somebody does this to me, yeah, I'm gonna become a killer. And that's what Jake decides to do. That episode ends with Jake listening to Chucky and agreeing to try and kill Lexi. That's what I meant earlier when I said we kind of have the same deal with Jake that we had with Andy, where we're in the same boat as him. This fucked up shit that made Jake Jake compromise his morals and made me compromise my morals too. Listen, I understand that Lexi is a 14-year-old girl and her parents don't give a shit about her, so it's like a chain of abuse that leads to her being a bully. But this moment had me, a lot of other people, and our main character siding with the serial killer. Which you shouldn't do. Objectively speaking, killing people is worse than being mean to them. But everybody's got a breaking point, and this moment pushed Jake so close to the edge that in the next episode he does try and kill Lexi, and after he fails, he just sends Chucky to do it for him. After getting his ass kicked so consistently by life, Jake crumbles, breaks, and betrays himself. He gives in to the outside pressure, compromises himself. He goes against his nature to be what somebody else wants him to be. And we get to see Jake face that inner turmoil, the pain that comes when you betray yourself like that. Chucky is a truly evil soul, and despite what he says, a monster. He's going to kill regardless of whether Jake wants him to or not. But the thing that tears Jake apart is that in this instance, he wanted Chucky to do it. He sent Chucky to Lexi's house fully knowing what Chucky was capable of and what Chucky was going there to do. The destruction that followed, even if it was more than Jake asked for, it's still on him. And one of my favorite scenes in the whole show is when the reality of what Jake's done fully sets in, when he's talking to his parents' graves at the cemetery and hears the sirens in the distance.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
You know, up to this point, I do sympathize with Jake and I like Jake enough, but I really start to like him when he goes to the hospital at the start of the next episode and comes face to face with everything he's responsible for. Jake doesn't run away from the destruction he's caused and the innocent people he's hurt. And he pretty much only hurt innocent people because the only person that walked out of the Cross Mansion without any injuries is the one person that Jake sent Chucky to kill. It's kind of like ordering a 4-piece nugget from McDonald's and your DoorDasher brings you a 10-piece from Burger King. Point I'm making is that Jake sees exactly what Chucky has been trying to sell him on this entire time. Family members mourning their loved ones' lives irrevocably changed, pain just for the sake of pain. So a little bit later, Jake is presented with a layup, a situation that perfectly embodies the internal conflict he's been having the past 3 episodes. He catches Lexi before she falls over a ledge as they're looking for Chucky, and Chucky emerges. This person that Jake hated enough he was willing to compromise his morals for and attempt to murder. Jake literally holds her life in the palm of his hand. I know I'm just skimming around and not really covering plot details, but I do want to mention that Lexi has not redeemed herself at this point. She has been the worst up until the point she falls off this ledge. Jake still very much hates her, and he's now in a scenario where giving in to his anger is literally the easiest option. A point that Chucky, being a representation of all those outside pressures, does make. All Jake has to do here is let go. It is physically painful for Jake to not give in to his anger, to not compromise himself, to stay who he is. And yet, despite the potential for long-time damage to the shoulder that'll come back to bite him in 20 years...
Let go. Then you can go break the news to Junior, and everybody will get to see him cry. You can do it, Jake. Just let go.
Jake, please. No, I'm not like you, Chucky. I'm not a killer.
You're pathetic, Jake.
Jake crossed that line once before and he refuses to do it again. He looked over the edge and decided to step away from it. He chooses the right option even though it's the harder option. This internal conflict that Jake goes through has always been the most captivating thing about that first season to me. It's one that I think we can all relate to, even if only a few of us have a voodoo-possessed doll from the 80s whispering in our ears. That struggle to stay yourself no matter how much life beats you down and the pressures from the outside world try and force you to change who you are or suppress who you truly are. Jake doesn't let Chucky change who he is, and by fighting to stay himself, Jake gets stronger and forms unbreakable bonds. Another thing that really adds to the impact of Jake's resolve to stay himself is that the series does show us the consequences of letting somebody else decide who you are, with the juxtaposition between Jake and his cousin Junior. I haven't really mentioned Junior much outside of the fact that he picks on Jake because he thinks Jake is weird. But him picking on Jake for being weird has a lot to do with Junior's big flaw as a character. He pretty much only is who other people want him to be. Junior runs track not because he enjoys it, but because his dad was a big track star and he wants Junior to be one too. Junior bullies his cousin instead of standing up for him because that's what everybody else, including his girlfriend Lexi, does. Junior is a character who always capitulates to what other people want and always conforms to who they want him to be. He dresses up as his fucking dad for Halloween. The ultimate consequence of Junior always being who other people tell him to be is that when Chucky inevitably targets him, he's very successful in manipulating Junior. Just like with Jake, Chucky posits himself as better than Junior's father. And just like with Jake, Chucky does the exact same thing to Junior that Junior's dad used to do, making Junior more like him. When Junior commits patricide, he isn't freeing himself from his dictatorial father's rule, he's just submitting to somebody else's demands. Junior never gets a real chance to find out who he is because he's always trying to be who everybody else wants him to be. Junior is more successful than Jake, he's more popular than Jake, he has more friends, he has both his parents, neither of them are abusive, his family is richer than Jake's. Yet despite all of these advantages, Junior winds up a killer because unlike Jake, he compromises himself. Junior is who Jake very easily could have become if he didn't have that determination to be who he really is, if he listened to his anger instead of his morals. But it's ultimately that perseverance to not let the world turn him into a monster that makes me really love Jake as a character.
Admit it, Jake. When I killed your dad, you were thrilled. I saw it in your eyes.
I knew he'd never be able to hurt me.
And this is how you thank me?
Then I was pissed. I'm still pissed that we never got the chance to work it out or to be friends again.
I was your friend. I accepted you. Your father never would have.
Yes, he would have. If you only got the chance to meet Devin.
Oh, that is so gay.
Well, that's pretty much all I got to say on the topic. I hope you liked the video, and if you're disappointed that I'm not homophobic, did you miss all the Yakuza videos? That's on you, buddy. You set up unrealistic expectations. I made a Kiryu and Majima Valentine's Day special. Of course, I'm gonna wish the LGBT crew a happy Pride Month.